Welcome back to Two Hearts, where stories are weaved to explore the beauty of diverse cultures and the depths of human connection. In a world of sleek lines, graceful power, and picture perfect poise, excellence is possible, though doesn't happen overnight. But even with mastery, sometimes being better, stronger, and faster isn't applauded, but opens one up for even more ridicule. When faced with rigid social norms and societal constructs, can Shannon and Evan prove that the only thing that holds weight in their lives are their feelings for one another? Please enjoy At the Top of Her Game. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that more members of our community can continue to find content like this.
The air in Big Sky, Montana had a specific kind of crispness and purity to it. It was so cold it felt like tiny crystalline needles against the exposed skin of Shannon Clifton's face. So clean it seemed to scrub the lungs with every inhale. It was the air of a cathedral, and the mountains, the jagged, majestic, snow-draped spine of the Spanish peaks, were its spires. This was her church. This was her sanctuary. From the observation deck of the Gallatin Mountain Lodge, Shannon watched the tiny, colorful dots of skiers and snowboarders snake down the perfectly groomed runs of Lone Peak. Her body, clad in a sleek black and cyan ski suit that she'd had custom tailored, was a study in beautiful contradiction. At 5'9", she was tall, and her frame was generously curved, with powerful thighs, full hips, and a bust that strained the technical fabric of her suit. In the world of alpine skiing, a sport that prized the lithe, wiry strength of prepubescent boys and willowy women, Shannon Clifton was a magnificent anomaly. Her skin was the color of rich, dark chocolate, her face a heart-shaped masterpiece with high cheekbones, a wide, full-lipped mouth, and eyes the color of warm, spiced honey. Her hair, a dense cascade of tight coils, was tamed beneath a stylish, satin-lined beanie, but a few rebellious spirals always escaped to frame her face, defying the helmet she'd just removed. She was a professional, a former D1 All-American at the University of Colorado, a two-time national champion in the slalom, and a competitor on the World Cup circuit for 3 seasons. She'd skied in Chamonix, Vail, and Kitzbühel. She'd known the thrill of the starting gate and the crushing agony of 1/100th of a second separating victory from obscurity. Now, at 29, she was the most sought-after private instructor at the resort, a legend among the locals, and a surprising discovery for the well-heeled tourists who flocked here each winter. Her body, the source of occasional but unwelcome ogling, so much quiet scrutiny and not-so-quiet whispers, was also the source of her power. She wasn't built for feather-light agility, she was built for explosive force and unshakable balance. Her center of gravity was low and solid, her core a fortress of muscle. When she planted her poles and carved a turn, she didn't just slice the snow, she commanded it. "You're staring at them again, Clifton." Shannon didn't turn. She recognized the voice of Marco, the resort's head of operations, and a man who'd been her mentor since she'd first arrived as a brash 20-year-old. He stood beside her, a mug of steaming coffee in his chapped hands, his own wiry frame a stark contrast to hers. "I'm not staring," Shannon said, her voice a low, melodic alto that carried a hint of smarm and warmth from her Pennsylvania upbringing. "I'm observing. It's my job." "Your job is with the Hendersons at 10, and please stop clocking the new guest over by the fire pit, the one who looks like he just stepped out of a GQ photo shoot for billionaires who ski." Shannon's lips twitched into a faint smile. She had indeed noticed the man. He was hard to miss. He sat alone, nursing a glass of what looked like whiskey, his posture relaxed but radiating an alert energy that cut through the lazy vacationing vibe of the lodge. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the expensive-looking merino wool sweater he wore. His hair was a dark, almost black-brown, with a few distinguished threads of silver at the temples, and he had a strong, clean-shaven jawline that seemed carved from granite. But it was his eyes that had snagged her attention. Even from a distance, they were a striking, piercing blue, and they weren't scanning the room, they were fixed on her, with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't the leering, dismissive curiosity she was used to, nor was it the pitying, good-for-her condescension that sometimes came from other women. It was intense, focused, as if you were studying a complex piece of art. "He's been here 3 days," Marco said, "takes a private lesson every morning with Chloe. Intermediate level, but he picks things up instantly. Says he's in town for a conference in Bozeman, but he's been here every day." "What's his name?" Shannon asked, feigning nonchalance. "Not sure," he answered. Shannon gave him an incredulous look. Marco Adair knew everyone and everything that occurred on this mountain. "Name's Whitmore, Evan Whitmore." "Whitmore," Shannon repeated softly, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "Sounds like money." "Sounds like trouble," Marco grunted, though without any real heat. "You've got enough admirers and critics without adding a mystery man to the mix. The Hendersons are waiting." Shannon took one last look at the mountains, drawing a deep, steadying breath. The cold air filled her lungs, chasing away the brief, unwelcome flicker of self-consciousness. She was Shannon Clifton. She had faced down icy 70-degree pitches at over 80 miles an hour. She could handle one man's stare. "Let them wait," she said, turning and flashing Marco a brilliant, confident smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The great ones always do. Evan Whitmore watched her walk away, and the feeling was akin to watching a force of nature recede. He'd been in Montana for 4 days, ostensibly for a tech summit, but he'd found himself completely captivated by the resort, and more specifically, by the woman the staff called the Comet. He'd first seen her on his second day, leading a group of terrified-looking children down a slope he'd found challenging. She moved with a liquid, powerful grace that was mesmerizing. Where other instructors were all sharp angles and shouted commands, she was fluidity and calm encouragement. She'd ski backward ahead of the kids, her body flowing over the terrain, her voice a steady, reassuring murmur that he could somehow hear even from the chairlift high above. He'd watched her catch a falling child, hoisting him back to his feet with an ease that spoke of incredible strength, all while never losing her own balance or her warm smile. He'd asked the perky blonde instructor, Chloe, about her. "Oh, Shannon," Chloe had said, her tone a mixture of awe and envy. "She's a legend, used to race on the World Cup circuit. She's the best instructor we have, by far. People book her a year in advance." Evan, a man who built billion-dollar companies by deconstructing complex systems and identifying outliers, was utterly fascinated. In a sport defined by a very specific physical archetype, Shannon Clifton was a glorious, beautiful outlier. The whispers around the lodge were subtle but persistent. "Can you believe how she moves for her size?" Or, "She's got so much talent, it's so unfortunate about her build." It was the kind of coded language of the privileged and prejudiced that Evan had learned to tune out, but it only sharpened his focus. They saw a peculiarity. He saw a masterpiece of efficiency and power. They saw an anomaly. He saw a story he desperately wanted to read. He was a man who appreciated excellence in all its forms, whether in the elegant architecture of a new data center or the flawless execution of a hostile takeover. And Shannon Clifton, in her element, was the embodiment of excellence. He finished his whiskey and decided to stop observing. He was a man of action, after all. Shannon's afternoon was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The Henderson family, Eugene, a blustering hedge fund manager, his wife Stephanie, who seemed more interested in her phone than her children, and their 2 kids, a sullen teenage boy and a terrified 10-year-old girl, were a handful. Eugene kept trying to show her how it's done, resulting in 2 spectacular equipment-spraying falls. Stephanie complained about the cold. The boy, Kyle, insisted he already knew everything, and little Madison, the only one with any real interest, was paralyzed by a fear of falling. Shannon handled them all with the patience of a saint and the precision of a surgeon. She broke down Eugene's technique with gentle but firm corrections, used her most encouraging tone with Madison, and challenged Kyle to a race down a gentle slope, which she won easily, earning a grudging look of respect. By the end of the 2-hour lesson, Madison was making tentative turns on her own, Kyle was actually listening, and Eugene, for the first time all day, was humbled. "You're a miracle worker, Shannon," Eugene said, handing her a thick wad of cash as a tip. "I don't know how you do it." "It's my job, Mr. Henderson," she said with a professional smile, her body aching in a dozen familiar places. She was unstrapping her skis, the metallic clank echoing in the crisp afternoon air, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, and her breath caught. It was the man from the lodge. Up close, he was even more imposing. His blue eyes were like shards of a winter sky, and they held an unnerving, direct gaze. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was a smooth, resonant tenor with a calm authority that was impossible to ignore. "I'm Evan Whitmore." Shannon straightened up, pulling off her gloves and tucking them under her arm. "Shannon Clifton. I know who you are, Mr. Whitmore. I've seen you around the lodge." A flicker of something, amusement, surprise, crossed his face. "Please, call me Evan, and I suppose that puts me at a disadvantage. While I know of Shannon Clifton, the legendary instructor, I don't know the woman herself. I was hoping you might rectify that." The directness of his request was disarming. It wasn't a line, it was a statement of intent. Delivered with the same calm confidence he seemed to apply to everything else. Shannon was used to men fumbling, either trying too hard to be charming or being awkwardly patronizing. Evan Whitmore did neither. He simply stood there, a tall, powerful, handsome man in a landscape of staggering beauty, and asked to know her. "I'm not sure what you've heard," Shannon said, her voice guarded. She leaned her skis against the rack, the movement giving her a moment to collect herself. The last rays of the afternoon sun were painting the peaks of Lone Peak in shades of rose and gold, and the air was growing colder and a bit sharper. "I've heard you're the best," he said simply. "I've watched you teach. I watched you ski yesterday on the North Summit snowfield. You were carving lines that most of the pros on the mountain would envy." Had he really been watching her on a double black diamond run? A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. That wasn't idle curiosity, that was reconnaissance. "Do you ski that run?" "No," he admitted, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "My skills are more utilitarian. I can get down the mountain in one piece, which is about all my New York-based ambition requires. But I appreciate artistry when I see it. And what you do is art." Shannon felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. It was a potent combination, to be seen not just for her body or her skill, but for the artistry of it. "Thank you, Evan. That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, it's an observation," he corrected gently. "Listen, I know your day is done. I'm not trying to be presumptuous, but I'd be grateful if you'd allow me to buy you a drink, or dinner, whatever you're comfortable with. I'd just like to talk." The offer hung in the freezing air between them, every instinct honed by years of being the big girl in a room full of slender athletes screamed at her to be cautious. Men like him didn't usually approach women like her with pure intentions. It was often a fetish, a bet, a novelty to be placated. But his eyes, they held no judgment, no leering appraisal. They held respect and a genuine, almost academic curiosity that piqued her own. "I could eat," she found herself saying, the words surprising her as much as they did him. "But I'm not dressed for the lodge." "Then we won't go to the lodge," he said, as if it were the simplest problem in the world. "There's a place in town, the Hearthstone Tavern. It's quiet, the food is excellent, and they don't care if you show up in ski boots. I can have my car brought around." Shannon hesitated for only a second longer. "All right, Evan, but I'm driving myself." He nodded as if her condition was perfectly reasonable. "Fair enough. I'll meet you there in an hour?" "An hour," she agreed. An hour later, Shannon walked into the Hearthstone Tavern, a cozy, rustic chic restaurant on the outskirts of Big Sky. She'd changed into dark-washed jeans that hugged her curves, a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater, and her favorite pair of leather boots. She'd let her hair down from its confinement, and the dense coils framed her face, a dark cloud against the pale material. She felt more like herself, less like the instructor and more like the woman. Evan was already there, seated at a secluded table in a corner. He'd changed, too, into a crisp, dark blue button-down shirt that made his eyes even more striking. He stood when she approached, a gesture of old-world chivalry that was so unexpected it made her smile. "You came," he said, and for the first time, he heard a note of relief in his voice. "I said I would," she replied, sliding into the booth. Dinner was a revelation. The conversation flowed with an ease she hadn't experienced in years. He didn't ask about her body or her struggle. He asked about her first pair of skis, a pair of beat-up K2s she'd gotten at a church thrift store in the Poconos. He asked about the feeling of the starting gate, the roar of the crowd, the specific technical challenge of a downhill course versus a giant slalom. In turn, she found herself asking about him. He was the founder and CEO of a data analytics firm based in Manhattan, a company that was, in his words, in the business of finding patterns where others saw only noise. He explained his work not with boring jargon, but with fascinating analogies, comparing his algorithms to the way a master chef layers flavors. "I'd say it isn't that different from what you do," he noted, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. "You read the mountain. You see the subtle changes in the snow texture, the light, the pitch. You anticipate the next turn, the next challenge. You're processing a massive amount of sensory data in real time and executing it with physical precision." Shannon stared at him, truly impressed. "No one's ever described my skiing like that before. Most people just think I'm brave or athletic." "You are," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But you're also brilliant. Your body is not an irregularity in your sport. It's a different, and in some ways, superior tool. A lower center of gravity, immense core strength. You're built for power and stability, not just speed. The sport just hasn't caught up to the physics of you yet." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. For years, she'd fought against the narrative that her body was a liability. She'd trained harder, dieted stricter, and pushed herself to the absolute limit to prove she belonged. But no one, not even her most supportive coaches, had ever framed her difference as an advantage. I don't know what to say to that," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "It's just what I see." The rest of the dinner passed in a comfortable, engaging blur. They talked about everything and nothing: favorite books, terrible movies, the strange appeal of Montana's vast emptiness. When the check came, he didn't fight her on it, simply allowing her to pay for her half, which she appreciated more than he knew. He walked her to her truck, a sturdy, four-wheel drive Toyota that was as practical as she was. The night was crystal clear, the Milky Way a brilliant smear across the inky sky. "I had a wonderful time, Shannon," he said, his breath pluming in the cold air. "Me too, Evan." "Can I see you again?" he asked, his directness returning. "Not just on the mountain, off it." She looked up at him, at his handsome face illuminated by the distant lights of the restaurant. She saw no games, no hidden agenda. She just saw a man who was genuinely interested in her. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." The next few weeks were a blur of lessons and stolen moments. Evan's business had him traveling between New York and Montana for a prolonged period, and Shannon hadn't minded. He would meet her at the end of her day, sometimes with a thermos of hot chocolate, sometimes just with a quiet presence that was becoming a comfort. One afternoon, he convinced her to take him down one of her favorite intermediate runs. He was a competent, if not flashy, skier, and he listened to her every correction with an intensity that was both flattering and a little intimidating. No, 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 she said, laughing as he executed a sloppy turn. You're skiing from your feet. You need to ski from your core. Your legs are just the tools. The power comes from right here. She patted her stomach just below her ribs. Imagine you're a marionette, and all the strings are connected to your navel. Everything moves from there. He tried again, and this time the turn was cleaner, more fluid. Better, she conceded. You're a quick study. I have a very good teacher, he replied, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. But the bubble of their private world was bound to burst. It happened on a Saturday, at the base of the main lift. Shannon was waiting for a group of corporate executives, a notoriously demanding bunch. Evan was there, watching from a respectful distance. A group of 3 women, all clad in the latest designer ski wear and all visibly inebriated, stumbled past him and stopped near where Shannon was collecting her equipment. "Oh my God, look!" the bottle-blonde ringleader with a UV-induced tan said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It's the big girl. I saw her yesterday. It's like watching a bear on skis." Her friends snickered. Shannon didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. What she'd initially wanted to point out was the intentional effort that each of them had made to select and wear, like a costume, an array of cosmetically altered a la carte body parts she had naturally been blessed with. But instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the lift line, her expression a mask of professional calm. It was a defense mechanism she had perfected over years of similar encounters. She imagined a wall of ice around herself, thick and impenetrable. The words were just wind, unable to penetrate the surface. "I know, right?" the second woman, a redhead with too much lipstick, chimed in. "I just don't get it. How does she even stay up? It defies physics. It's unnatural." The third one, a petite brunette, giggled. "Maybe they should put her in the ski patrol. One good belly flop and she could stop an avalanche." Their laughter was a grating, ugly sound in the crisp mountain air. A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably, looking away but saying nothing in her defense. A father pulled her daughter closer, murmuring something to her. This was the wrong kind of attention she was so familiar with, the kind that reduced her, her years of training, her championships, her very soul to a crude punchline. She could feel Evan's gaze on her, hot and heavy. She willed him not to intervene. The last thing she needed was a white knight riding in to save her. She had been fighting her own battles for 29 years. She could handle a few catty, privileged tourists. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Shannon turned her head. She didn't look at the women directly, but just past them, as if they were insignificant scenery. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and smooth, yet it cut through their laughter like a shard of glass. "The avalanche danger in the area is currently rated as moderate," she said, her tone utterly devoid of emotion. "But your concern for mountain safety is commendable. If you'll excuse me, my clients are waiting." The effect was instantaneous. The women's laughter died in their throats. They were expecting a reaction: anger, tears, shame. They were not expecting to be dismissed with the same detached professionalism she'd used to comment on the weather. It rendered them powerless. They gaped at her, their drunken bravado evaporating in the face of her unassailable poise. Shannon turned away completely, her attention now on the group of men in expensive ski suits who were her next lesson. "Gentlemen, welcome to Big Sky. I'm Shannon. Are we ready to carve up some fresh powder?" She was met with a chorus of eager affirmations. As she led them toward the lift, she risked a glance back. Evan was standing exactly where he'd been, but his entire demeanor had changed. The calm, curious observer was gone. In his place was a man coiled with a barely contained lethal fury. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and his face was a mask of cold, hard anger. His blue eyes, usually so warm and intelligent, were now fixed on the retreating backs of the 3 women with an intensity that was frankly terrifying. He looked like he was about to dismantle their entire lives, not just their egos. The sight of it sent a strange, unfamiliar thrill through her. It wasn't the thrill of being rescued. It was the thrill of being so fiercely, unequivocally defended. He didn't mention the incident, not that evening when he met her at her truck, not when they drove to a quiet, out-of-the-way steakhouse he knew. He was reserved on the drive, his knuckles still white on the steering wheel of his own rented SUV. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, charged with the unspoken. It wasn't until they were seated, with a bottle of a robust Cabernet Sauvignon breathing between them, that he finally spoke. "I'm going to buy that restaurant," he said, out of the blue. Shannon, who was in the middle of sipping her water, nearly choked. "What? Why?" "The one where we had dinner the first time," he clarified, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "The Hearthstone Tavern. I'm going to make an offer in the morning." Shannon stared at him, utterly bewildered. "Evan, what are you talking about? You can't just buy a restaurant because you had a good steak." "It's not about the steak," he said, his voice low and intense. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "It's about the owner. He came over to our table. He knows you. He called you Shannon, not the instructor. He respects you. I like that. I want to invest in places and people who have good character." Shannon shook her head. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You can't base a multi-million-dollar investment on whether the owner is nice to me." "Watch me," he said, his eyes holding hers. There was no humor in his expression. He was dead serious. "But that's not what I really wanted to talk about." He took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving her face. "What happened today, with those women? That's not the first time that's happened to you, is it?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. The quiet fury she'd seen earlier was back, simmering just beneath the surface of his calm exterior. Shannon sighed, setting her glass down. The professional mask she wore so well was for the mountain, for the clients. Here, in the warm, intimate glow of the restaurant with him, she felt it begin to crack. "No, Evan, it's not. It comes with the territory. My body, my skin. I'm a double threat to their narrow little worldview." "Threat?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "How is excellence a threat?" "Because it doesn't fit their narrative," she said, her voice gaining a slight edge. "They need the world to be simple. Thin is graceful, thick is ungainly, white is expected, black is other, delicate is feminine, strong is masculine. I'm all of those things and none of them. I'm a size 18 on a good day, black woman who is one of the best skiers on a mountain full of white, wealthy people. It breaks their brains. So they have to reduce me, make me a joke. It's the only way they can feel safe and secure in their smallness." The words poured out of her, a torrent of truths she rarely voiced. She'd learned long ago that complaining only made you a target. You smiled, you endured. You proved them wrong with your performance, not your words. Evan listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say he was sorry it happened. "Tell me about the worst one," he said quietly. Shannon winked. "What?" "The worst time. The moment that hurt the most. Tell me." She looked down at her hands, tracing the rim of her glass. Why was she telling him this? And why, God, why did she want to? She took a deep breath, diving into a memory she kept locked away. "It was my second year on the World Cup circuit," she began, her voice softer now, more vulnerable. "I was 21. I'd just placed in the top 10 in a Super G in Lenzerheide. It was a huge breakthrough for me. I was on cloud 9. There was a party that night, a sponsor thing. I was so excited. I bought a new dress, this beautiful silver number. I felt invincible. She paused, the memory as sharp and cold as the wind on a mountaintop. The head of my main sponsor was there, a German guy, old money. He called me over, introduced me to his associates. He was smiling, calling me his rising star. Then he pulls me aside, puts his hand on my back and says, "Shannon, you are a marvel, truly, but you must understand, skiing is a sport of aesthetics, and your physique, it is not what the European audience expects to see in a champion. It is too much. You are too much." The words, spoken in a clipped German accent, echoed in her mind. He told me if I wanted to secure my funding for the next season, I should consider a more streamlined silhouette. He suggested I talk to his nutritionist, a woman who was famous for getting models runway ready. He wasn't just insulting me. He was telling me, to my face, after the best race of my life, that my body, my very existence, was a commercial liability. She looked up at Evan, and for the first time allowed him to see the raw, unvarnished pain in her eyes. That was worse than any joke on a ski slope. That was someone who held my career in his hands, telling me I wasn't just different, I was wrong, that I had to erase myself to be worthy. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Evan's face had gone pale, his jaw set like granite. The look in his eyes was no longer just fury, it was a cold, terrifying promise of retribution. "What was his name?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "No, Evan," Shannon said, shaking her head firmly. "No, this is my story, my past. You don't get to fight my battles for me. I won't have you be my avenger. That's not what this is." "Then what is this?" he countered, leaning forward, his voice intense. "Because hearing about the German, watching those women talk to you like that today, that all felt like a violation. It felt like watching someone take a blowtorch to a masterpiece, and I don't stand by and watch masterpieces burn." Shannon's breath hitched. The air between them crackled, thick with an energy that was part fury, part something far more dangerous. "This," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "is two people getting to know each other. It's not a crusade." "Then help me understand," he pleaded, his gaze softening just enough to let her see the vulnerability beneath the anger. "Because all I see is a woman who has spent her life being told she's too much, and I can't help but think that they were all blind. They weren't worthy of the too much they got." His words were a balm and a brand, soothing old wounds while igniting a new, terrifying fire in her chest. No one had ever seen her like this, not as an anomaly, not as an inspiration, but as an abundance, as something to be cherished, not contained. The rest of the dinner was a study in high tension. They didn't talk about the incident again, but it hung between them, a third party at the table. Every accidental brush of her hand against hers as he reached for the salt sent a jolt through her. Every time his gaze lingered on her lips a second too long made her heart hammer against her ribs. The slow burn had caught flame, and the heat was becoming unbearable. He drove her back to her small, rented cabin on the edge of a quiet meadow. The snow fell in thick, silent flakes, dusting the pine trees and blanketing the world in white. He parked behind her truck and killed the engine. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of their breathing. "Thank you for dinner," she said, her hands fumbling with the seatbelt clasp. "I'll always listen, Shannon," he said, his voice a low rumble in the enclosed space of the car. She turned to say goodnight, but the words died on her lips. He was looking at her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He wasn't just looking, he was seeing. He saw the exhaustion, the lingering hurt, and the burgeoning desire she was trying so hard to suppress. "Come here," he whispered. It wasn't a command, it was a request. Soft and reverent. And in that moment, she was powerless to refuse. She leaned across the console, the space between them shrinking with every agonizing second. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the tiny flecks of silver in his blue eyes, could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne mixed with the cold air. He raised a hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was electric, a current that ran through her entire body. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, and she let out a shaky breath. "I've wanted to do this since the first day I saw you," he murmured, his lips now just inches from hers. "We shouldn't," she breathed, but it was a hollow protest. Her body was screaming the opposite. Every nerve ending was alight, every cell craving the contact she knew was coming. "I know," he agreed, his voice thick with a desire that mirrored her own. "But what if we do?" And then he closed the final infinitesimal distance. The kiss was not what she expected. It wasn't demanding or aggressive. It was slow, deep, and questioning. It was a kiss that asked for permission, that sought to understand. His lips were soft but firm, moving against hers with a certainty that made her head spin. She responded instinctively, her hand coming up to rest on the solid warmth of his chest, feeling the steady, rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, a slow, intoxicating exploration that tasted of wine, snow, and a longing so profound it felt like coming home. It was reckless, and it was perfect, and for the first time in a very long time, Shannon Clifton felt completely and utterly seen. The week that followed was a dizzying blur of stolen moments and breathless tension. The kiss had shattered something between them, and the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The easy camaraderie was still there, but now it was laced with an undercurrent of simmering, palpable desire. They skied together in the mornings before her lessons began. On the empty, freshly groomed runs, he was a focused student, but his focus was split. He'd watch her demonstrate a turn, his eyes tracing the powerful line of her body, the way her ski pants hugged her curves, and a look would cross his face, a mixture of admiration and raw need that made her stomach clench. "Your hips," he said one morning, his voice low as they paused halfway down a run. "You initiate the turn with your hips. It's hypnotic." "It's called angulation," she replied, her voice a little too breathless. "It's technique." "It's art," he corrected, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "And it's distracting as hell." The accidental touches became intentional, a hand on the small of her back to guide her through a crowded lodge, fingers brushing against hers as he handed her a mug of hot chocolate. The tension was a constant thrumming presence, a third member of their party, making every simple interaction feel charged with possibility. The climax of their week-long dance came on a Friday. A storm had rolled in overnight, dumping 2 feet of pristine powder. The mountain was alive with electric energy, and Shannon was in her element. She had a free afternoon, and Evan, canceling a conference call, met her at the top of the Lone Peak tram. "I want you to show me your mountain," he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. She took him into the headwaters, a vast, tree-lined bowl that held the best snow on the mountain. It was challenging terrain, but Shannon moved through it with an intuitive, almost primal grace. She was in her element, a powerful, beautiful force of nature carving through the untouched powder. Evan followed, his skills pushed to their limit, but his eyes never left her. They stopped at the edge of a steep drop-off, the world spread out below them in a breathtaking panorama of white and evergreen. The sun broke through the clouds, turning the snowfield into a blinding sea of diamonds. "It's incredible," Evan said, his voice filled with wonder. "It is," Shannon agreed, her heart soaring. This was a place most sacred, her own safe space, and she was sharing it with him. He turned to her, his face flushed from the cold and the exertion. In that moment, with the world at their feet and the adrenaline humming in their veins, the careful control they'd both been exercising finally snapped. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his gloved hands cupping her face. "I can't pretend anymore," he said. "Pretend what?" she breathed, her hands resting on his chest. "Pretend that all I want is to talk," he said, and then his lips were on hers. This kiss was different from the first. It was hungry, desperate, fueled by days of unspoken want. It was a kiss that claimed, that demanded, that left no room for doubt. He backed her up against the rough bark of a pine tree, his body pressing against hers, a solid, warm weight in the cold mountain air. His hands moved from her face to her waist, gripping her hips, pulling her flush against him. She could feel the hard, solid length of his desire through their layers of clothing, and a soft, involuntary gasp escaped her lips. "Evan," she moaned, her head falling back against the tree as his lips trailed a line of fire down her neck. "We're on a mountain." "I don't care," he growled against her skin. "I've been thinking about this for a week. No, 3 weeks now. About you. About touching you." His hands roamed, tracing the curve of her back, the swell of her hips. "God, Shannon, if you only knew the things I want to do to you." His words were a potent aphrodisiac, a raw, honest confession that sent a bolt of pure desire straight to her core. This was the recklessness she craved, the stakes that felt impossibly high. Making out in a snowbound tree line on a ski run was insane, but she'd never felt more alive. She tangled her gloved fingers in his hair, pulling his face back to hers for another searing kiss. The world around them faded away, leaving only the sensation of his lips, his hands, the hard press of his body, and the frantic beating of their hearts. It was a moment so tempting, so full of reckless possibility, that it felt like the only thing that mattered. But reality, in the form of the distant rumble of a snowcat, intruded. They broke apart, breathing heavily, their breath pluming in the cold air. They stared at each other, their eyes wide, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This had changed everything. The ride down the mountain was quiet, the charged silence now pregnant with a new, unspoken question. The stolen glances were no longer furtive, but open, full of a naked hunger that was both thrilling and terrifying. Back at her cabin, the tension was so thick it was suffocating. He followed her inside, kicking off his boots at the door, his movements economical and deliberate. She turned to face him in the small, cozy living room, the fire she'd left crackling in the stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow across his face. The space, usually her personal refuge, suddenly felt impossibly small, filled to the brim with his presence, with the weight of what had just happened on the mountain. "Evan," she began, her voice unsteady, "we need to talk." "I know," he said, his voice low and rough. He didn't move from the doorway, giving her space, but his eyes held her captive. "But not yet. First, I need you to know something." He took a step forward, then another, closing the distance until he was standing just in front of her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from him, a magnetic pull that was almost physical. "That man in Lenzerheide, the sponsor, tell me his name, Shannon." Her heart sunk. This was the last conversation she wanted to have. "Evan, no. I told you, that's my past. It's over." "It's not over," he countered, his voice dangerously soft. "It's a perpetual ache that you carry. I can see it. It's in your eyes when you talk about it. It's in the way you hold yourself, like you're always waiting for the next person to tell you that you're not enough." He was right. God, he was so right that it hurt, but she couldn't let him do this. "And what are you going to do? Fly to Germany and beat him up? Buy his company? That's not how it works. You can't fix this with money." "No," he agreed, his gaze unwavering. "I can't fix it, but I can make him regret it. I can make sure he and everyone like him understands that you are not a liability to be managed. You are an asset to be valued. I can change the narrative." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few quick taps, he turned the screen to face her. It was an email. The subject line read, "Proposal, the Clifton Initiative." She stared at it, her mind reeling. "What is this?" "It's something I started working on after our dinner the other night," he said, his voice losing its edge, replaced with a passionate intensity. "My company, we do data. We find patterns. Well, I've been looking at a new market, the market of the unrepresented, the outliers, the people who are told they don't fit. I'm starting a new foundation, a venture capital fund, specifically to sponsor and support athletes in niche sports who don't fit the traditional mold. Different backgrounds, different lived experiences, different stories." He swiped to the next screen. It was a mission statement. "Our first project, our flagship athlete, will be you, not as a client, but as a partner, a consultant. We'll build a program around you. We'll create camps for plus-sized skiers, for rural and inner-city kids who've never seen shreddable, pristine mountaintop snow. We'll sponsor a team. We'll take the things they see as weaknesses and rebrand them as strengths. We'll build an empire on the foundation of your too much." Shannon stared at the phone, then at his face. He was completely serious. This wasn't a whim. It was a fully formed, multi-million-dollar plan, a crusade, and it was all for her, all because of her. The Clifton Initiative. It was a dream she hadn't even known she had, a validation so profound it felt unreal. But a tiny, pragmatic corner of her mind, the part that had navigated the cutthroat world of professional sports, began to whisper, how? How could he, a visitor to the mountain, a man with a company in New York, have the power or the connections to create something so monumental so quickly? And more importantly, why? "Evan, the initiative idea is incredible, no question, but how does it work? I mean, the lodge, the partnerships, it's a huge undertaking. You make it sound so simple." He stilled for a fraction of a second, a movement so subtle she almost missed it. "It's what I do, Shannon. I see a problem, I build a solution. I have the resources, the team. It's just a matter of allocating them." "But the lodge," she pressed, turning in his arms to look up at him. "Marco would have to be on board. The ownership, it's complicated. It's not just a business decision, it's a community. What about my job?" The question hung in the air between them, the casual warmth in his eyes constricted, replaced by a guarded look she hadn't seen before. He took a breath, and she knew, with a sinking certainty, that he was about to say something that would change everything. "Your job is safe, Shannon," he said, his voice careful and measured. "More than safe. It would be central to the whole operation. You'd have creative control, a title, a salary that would make your head spin." "That's not what I asked," she said, her own voice losing its softness, taking on the sharp, clear tone of an instructor correcting a student's form. "I asked how. How can you promise that? You don't own Gallatin Mountain Lodge." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze holding hers. The lie, or rather the omission, was there in his eyes. He looked away, toward the window, as if the answer were written on the frost-covered glass. "Evan?" "I do," he said, finally turning back to her. The words were quiet, but they landed like an avalanche. The world tilted on its axis. Her vision blurred and her ears registered only white noise. 51%. A silent partner? Her boss? The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. His easy access, his ability to command attention, the way Marco casually mentioned him, not out of courtesy for a guest, but out of deference to an owner. The Clifton Initiative wasn't just a grand romantic gesture, it was a corporate synergy. He wasn't just a man who admired her, he was a CEO leveraging an asset. The warmth in her chest turned to a block of ice. the memory of his hands on her skin, his whispered words of praise, now felt tainted. Had any of it been real? Or had it all been a calculated strategy to get close to his asset, to understand his investment? A silent partner? She repeated, her voice hollow, devoid of all emotion. She untangled herself from his arms, stepping back, putting a physical distance between them that felt like a chasm. All this time, you sat there and let me talk about Marco, about the lodge, about my job. You let me talk about my boss. Shannon, it's not like that, he began, reaching for her. She flinched away from his touch as if it burned. Don't. The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing her breath. Was any of it real? The dinners, the conversations about my past, the things you said about my body being a masterpiece? Her voice cracked on the last word. Or was that all part of the due diligence, figuring out what makes your prize asset tick? No, God, no, he said, his face a mask of pained desperation. That was all real, every second of it. That's why I didn't tell you. I was terrified of this, of you looking at me like you are right now. You were terrified I'd find out you're my boss? That you've been lying to me since the moment we met? The anger was a cold, sharp thing, a shard of ice in her veins. It was the only thing holding her together against the crushing weight of his betrayal. Let me get this straight, she said, her voice dangerously calm, the kind of calm that precedes a catastrophic storm. You, Evan Whitmore, the majority owner of this resort, decided to conduct a little, field research on your most unusual employee? Shannon, that's not fair, he pleaded, taking another step toward her. I came here for a conference. I saw you ski. I was captivated. Yes, I knew I had a financial stake in the lodge, but that had nothing to do with how I felt about you. It still doesn't. Doesn't it? She shot back, her voice rising. Everything makes so much sense now. The way you watched me, it wasn't admiration, it was assessment. You weren't seeing a woman, you were analyzing a commodity. Let's see how the plus-size black ski instructor performs under pressure. Let's see if she has the marketability to be the face of a new brand venture. That's a disgusting distortion of the truth, he said, his own voice tightening with frustration and hurt. I fell for you, Shannon. The idea for the initiative came because of how I felt, not the other way around. Oh, I'm sure it did, she said with a bitter, humorless laugh. What a brilliant collaboration. You get the girl and you get to monetize her inspirational story at the same time. It's the perfect Whitmo acquisition, isn't it? Find an undervalued asset, rebrand it, and cash in. Every word was a weapon, and she aimed them with deadly precision because she was aiming at the heart of her own deepest fear, that she was, after all, just a novelty to be exploited. He had seemed so different, so immune to the superficial, but he was just like the German sponsor, only his methods were more sophisticated, his cage gilded with romance and intellectual praise instead of insults. He stared at her, his face pale, the confident, commanding CEO utterly gone, replaced by a man who looked like he was watching his world burn down. Is that really what you think of me? After everything? After the way I listened to you, the way I looked at you, do you truly believe I see you as a line item on a balance sheet? I don't know what to believe, she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving behind a profound, soul-deep weariness. All I know is that the one person I thought saw me for me was the one person with the most reason not to, and you lied. By omission, you lied, from the very beginning. She couldn't be in the same room with him another second. She couldn't breathe. The air was thick with his deception. Get out, she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. Shannon, please, just let me explain. I said, get out, she repeated, her eyes like flint. Get out of my house, Evan, now. He searched her face, his expression a maelstrom of regret and desperation. Seeing no crack in her resolve, he gave a slow, defeated nod. He turned, walked to the door, and pulled on his boots without a word. The sound of the door clicking shut behind him was the loudest, most final sound she had ever heard. She sank to the floor, her back against the kitchen cabinets, and finally let the tears fall. Sleep was a country she couldn't find a visa to. The night was a blur of replayed conversations, each word twisting into a new shape of betrayal. By morning, her grief had hardened into a cold, brittle anger. She dressed with a mechanical precision, her movements sharp and angry. Her ski suit felt like armor. Today, she would not be the victim. She would be the prosecutor. She marched through the lodge, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The friendly greetings from other staff bounced off her like pebbles off steel. She found Marco in his office, a cluttered, cozy space that smelled of pine and old coffee. He looked up from his mountain of paperwork, his cheerful smile faltering when he saw her face. "Shannon, you okay? You look like you're about to go punch a moose." "Did you know?" she asked, her voice clipped, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Marco blinked, clearly taken aback. "Did I know what?" "Did you know that Evan Whitmore is the majority owner of this resort? That he's your boss?" The color drained from Marco's face. He leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. He let out a long, weary sigh, rubbing a hand over his weathered face. He didn't have to answer. His silence was a confession. "Oh, kid, I'm so sorry. I should have told you." "Why didn't you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "You watched us. You encouraged it. You set me up." No, it wasn't like that," he said, holding his hands placatingly. "He's a silent partner, Shannon. He bought in 5 years ago, saved us from a corporate buyout that would have turned this place into another soulless Vail resort. He lets me run the show. I've spoken to him on the phone maybe a dozen times. He's just a name on a quarterly report. When he showed up this month, he asked me to keep it quiet. He said he was here for personal reasons. He told me later that he'd met someone, and he wanted a chance to be seen as just a man, not the owner. I agreed because I've never seen him like this, and I've never seen you like this." "It doesn't matter what your reasons were," she said, her voice cracking. "You let me make a fool of myself." "You didn't make a fool of yourself," Marco said softly. "You fell in love. There's a difference. The information was never meant to be public, and it was never meant to hurt you."
He was just trying to, I don't know, level the playing field, I guess. "By lying?" she shot back. "That's a hell of a way to level the playing field," Shannon shrieked, conveniently bypassing his assertion about falling in love. "I know," Marco said, his shoulders slumping. "I know, and I'm sorry, Shannon. Truly." She turned and left without another word, his apology doing nothing to soothe the raw, gaping wound. There was no solace here. She needed the mountain. She needed speed. She needed the punishing, uncomplicated honesty of gravity. She was strapping on her skis at the base of the mountain, her movements sharp and aggressive, when she saw him. He was coming out of the lodge, his eyes scanning the crowd, and when they landed on her, they locked on with an intensity that made her heart stutter. He started toward her, his long legs eating up the distance. Panic flared in her chest. She couldn't face him. Not here, not in front of everyone. She couldn't listen to another explanation, another plea. She just needed to escape. Without a second thought, she snapped her boots into her bindings and pushed off, skating toward the nearest lift. It was the Lone Peak tram, the big one that went to the very top of the mountain, to the exposed, unforgiving terrain above the tree line. "Shannon, wait!" His voice cut through the air, but she didn't look back. She hopped onto the moving tram just as the doors were closing, turning her back to the glass, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Through the reflective surface, she saw him arrive at the loading platform, his face a mask of frustration as the tram began its silent, smooth ascent. She thought she was safe, but she had underestimated him. He was a man who solved problems. He didn't wait for the next tram. He turned and sprinted to the lift line for the high-speed quad that serviced a different part of the mountain, a route that would intersect with the terrain she was headed for. The tram ride was agony. 10 minutes of climbing, suspended in the air, with nothing but her own chaotic thoughts for company. By the time she reached the top and stepped out into the brutal, biting wind at 11,166 feet, she was vibrating with a frantic, nervous energy. She didn't pause to take in the breathtaking 360-degree view. She just pointed her skis downhill and pushed off. She was skiing angry. Every turn was an act of aggression, a carving knife slicing into the snow. She was letting the mountain have her fury, pouring all her pain and betrayal into her speed. The wind whipped tears from her eyes, freezing them on her lashes. She was flying, a reckless, furious comet against the white. But a part of her, the part that was still the instructor, the part that was still in love with him, couldn't resist. She chanced to look back over her shoulder. He was there. He was below her, but he was gaining. He was skiing with a powerful, determined rhythm, his form not as artful as hers, but impossibly strong and relentless. He was coming for her. The sight of him, so focused, so unyielding, sent a jolt of pure panic through her. She looked forward again, her attention fractured, her rhythm broken. The fluid, almost primal connection she had with the mountain, the one that usually made the snow an extension of her own body, was severed. The sight of him, so determined, so relentless, had splintered her concentration. The mountain, which had been her confidant and her sanctuary, suddenly became a treacherous stranger beneath her skis. She saw the patch of ice a split second too late. It wasn't a broad, visible sheet. It was an insidious, polished snake of blue-white that curled across the steep rollover, a trap for the unfocused. Her mind, reeling from the emotional collision course, was too slow to send the precise, nuanced commands her body needed. Wait forward, edge set, absorb the bump, her internal instructor screamed, but her muscles, flooded with adrenaline and panic, betrayed her. She was a fraction of a second late on her edge set. Instead of carving cleanly, her outside ski skidded, catching the hard, unforgiving surface with a sickening metallic scrape. The physics were instantaneous and brutal. The momentum of her powerful, aggressive descent had nowhere to go but sideways and down. Her world exploded into a violent, chaotic symphony of white and blue. The mountain, which she had been commanding just moments before, now viciously reclaimed her. She felt the sickening lurch of her bindings releasing, a designed safety feature that now felt like a betrayal as it sent her skis rocketing away into the powder. The impact was a series of brutal, percussive blows, her hip, then her shoulder, then the back of her helmet cracking against the packed snow. It wasn't a graceful, tumbling fall. It was a ragdoll, bone-jarring impact that stole the air from her lungs in a single, violent gasp. For a moment, there was only the shocking, all-encompassing cold and the stunning, absolute silence that followed the roar of her own fall. She lay on her back, staring up at the achingly blue Montana sky, her body a canvas of blooming pain. She couldn't breathe. Her diaphragm was seized in a painful spasm, her chest a locked box. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her consciousness. She tried to draw a breath, but nothing came, just a frantic, silent heaving of her chest. And then he was there. He materialized over her, his face a pale, desperate mask against the bright sky. He had skied to a stop just above her, his own skis planted securely in the snow, his movements efficient and controlled. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. He was beside her in an instant, his knees sinking into the snow as he knelt by her head. "Shannon," he said, his voice sharp with command but laced with a terror so raw it was palpable. "Shannon, look at me. Can you hear me?" She couldn't answer. She could only stare up at him, her eyes wide with panic, her mouth open in a silent scream for air. Okay, he said, his training or his innate composure kicking in. "Don't try to talk. Just look at me. Focus on my voice." His gloved hands were gentle but impossibly firm as they began a rapid, systematic assessment. "I'm going to check you. Just nod or shake your head. Does your neck hurt? Your back?" She managed a slow, wobbly shake of her head. The pain was everywhere and nowhere, a dull, throbbing ache that was already beginning to sharpen in her hip and shoulder. "Good.
"Okay, that's good," he murmured, more to himself than to her. His eyes scanned her body, his gaze clinical yet filled with an unmistakable anguish. "Where does it hurt the worst? Your hip?" She managed a weak nod, tears of pain and panic finally leaking from the corners of her eyes and tracing cold paths down her temples. "Okay, we'll leave your helmet on. Don't move," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stood up, his long frame casting a shadow over her, and with a few swift, expert movements, he retrieved her runaway skis and poles, plunging them into the snow nearby like a marker. He was securing the scene, taking control. Then he was back, kneeling beside her again. "I'm going to lift you," he said, his voice softer now, a stark contrast to the command of a moment before. "I need to get you off the mountain and to the hospital. It's going to hurt, but I need you to try to stay as still as you can. Can you do that for me?" "Home," she bit out quietly. "But you could have internal—" "Home." She just stared at him, her mind a fog of pain and confusion. He was the source of her agony, yet he was her only salvation. The irony was so bitter it was almost funny. "Okay," he whispered, his blue eyes locking onto hers, pleading. "I know you're pissed with me, but trust me. Just for this, please trust me." And in that moment, with the wind whipping around them and the pain radiating through her body, she had no other choice. She gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. He moved with a strength that was both shocking and incredibly careful. He slid one arm under her shoulders, his other arm hooking under her knees. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. He lifted her. A sharp, searing pain shot from her hip as he moved her, and she couldn't stop a cry of agony from escaping her lips. He winced as if he'd been struck, his face tightening with a mixture of guilt and resolve. He held her cradled against his chest, her head drooping against his shoulder, her body a dead weight. He was powerful, his stride sure and steady, as he began the long, arduous journey down the rest of the run, carrying her. She closed her eyes, burying her face in the rough wool of his coat, inhaling his scent, the clean, cold smell of the outdoors mixed with the familiar, intoxicating musk that was uniquely his. She was utterly, completely at his mercy. The man who had lied to her, who had broken her heart, was now carrying her broken body down a mountain, and she had never felt more safe or more trapped. The ride to her cabin was a silent, painful ordeal. He had somehow managed to get them both into his SUV, laying her gently across the back seat, her head pillowed on a folded-down ski jacket. Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony through her hip, but she didn't make a sound. She just stared out the window, watching the snow-covered pines blur past, a world of serene beauty that felt completely disconnected from the turmoil inside. He carried her into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind him with a soft thud that echoed in the quiet room. He took her straight to her bedroom and laid her down on the bed with the same excruciating gentleness he had used on the mountain. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the room was shadowed and cold. He didn't ask permission. He simply began to carefully undress her.
He disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a basin of warm water, a washcloth, and her first aid kit. He sat on the edge of the bed, his movements sure and practiced, as if he'd done this 1,000 times. "I need to cut this away," he said, his voice low, indicating the torn leg of her ski pants. She just stared at the ceiling, giving a silent, stiff nod. He produced a small pair of scissors from the first aid kit and carefully snipped the fabric away from her hip. A large, angry purple bruise was already blossoming across her skin, stark against her brown complexion. He cleaned the scrapes with the warm, soapy water, his touch so light it was almost imperceptible. She flinched once when the cloth touched a particularly deep abrasion, and he stopped immediately, his hand hovering over her skin. "Sorry," he whispered. "It's fine," she rasped, her voice hoarse from the fall and the unshed tears. He finished cleaning the wounds in silence, his focus absolute.
He applied antiseptic ointment and covered the worst of the scrapes with sterile gauze and medical tape. He worked with a quiet efficiency that was both comforting and infuriating. He was fixing her, tending to her, his actions a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage he had left in his wake. When he was done, he stood up, pulling the duvet over her, tucking it gently around her shoulders. He stoked the fire, coaxing it back to life, its crackling warmth slowly chasing the chill from the room. He brought her a glass of water and 2 ibuprofen, holding the straw to her lips when her hand shook too much to hold the glass. Only when she was settled, when the immediate physical needs had been met, did he sink into the armchair by the fire, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled with everything they hadn't said. Finally, he looked up, his face etched with a weariness and regret that went soul deep. "I didn't tell you because I was a coward," he said, his voice rough with emotion, plain and simple, "and because I was selfish." He stared into the fire, as if the answers were there in the flames. "My whole life, I've been Evan Whitmore, the CEO, Evan Whitmore, the billionaire. People see the title, the money, the power. They don't see me. They see an opportunity, a target, a means to an end. I learned a long time ago to build walls, to be careful, to compartmentalize. It's a lonely way to live, but it's safe." He finally dragged his eyes away from the fire and looked at her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression was a physical blow. "And then I came here, to this place I own but have never really seen, and I saw you, skiing. You weren't just skiing, you were in a conversation with the mountain. You were powerful and graceful, and so completely, unapologetically yourself. And in that moment, I didn't want to be Evan Whitmore, the owner. I didn't want to be the guy with the checkbook. I just wanted to be the man watching the beautiful woman ski." He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "The first time we spoke by the ski rack, you were so guarded. You had this incredible armor around you, and I just knew that if I walked up and said, 'Hi, I'm Evan Whitmore, the guy who signs your paychecks,' that armor would get 10 feet thicker. I would never have a chance. I would just be another man in a position of power trying to get something from you." "So you lied," she said, her voice flat, but the accusation lacked its earlier venom. She was listening, truly listening, for the first time. "I omitted," he corrected gently, "and it was the biggest mistake of my life, because the one thing I wanted, more than anything, was for you to see me, the man, not the title. And every day I didn't tell you, the lie got bigger. It became this cavern between us. I kept telling myself I'd find the right time, the right moment, but there was never a right moment because I was a coward. I was afraid of this exact scene. I was afraid of you looking at me with that look in your eyes, the one that says, 'I'm just like all the others.'" He stood up and began to pace slowly, a caged animal in the small room. "And the initiative, God, Shannon, that wasn't a business plan. It was a love letter. It was me seeing the injustice you faced, the brilliance you possess, and my brain, my stupid, analytical, problem-solving brain, latched on to the only way I knew how to fix it. I wanted to build you a world where you were never told you were too much again, where your uniqueness was celebrated as the undeniable masterpiece it is. It was a desperate, grand, arrogant attempt to show you how much I admired you, how much I loved you." He stopped pacing and stood at the foot of the bed, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I know it doesn't excuse it. I know the lie poisoned everything."
"And when you asked me about your job today, and I saw all the hope and trust in your face turn to suspicion and hurt, it was like I was the one who took that fall on the ice. It shattered me." He looked down at his feet, a picture of utter defeat. "I carried you down that mountain today, and all I could think was, please don't let her be permanently hurt. Please let her be okay. And a selfish, desperate part of me thought, maybe if I can take care of her, if I can fix this, she'll see. She'll see that it was never about the asset. It was always about the woman. The room was silent. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft, rhythmic cadence of their breathing. Shannon lay there, the physical pain in her hip a dull, distant throb compared to the seismic shift happening in her heart. She was replaying every moment, every conversation through this new lens. His intense focus wasn't assessment, it was fascination. His desire to fix things wasn't a power play. It was his flawed, clumsy way of showing he cared. The lie wasn't a malicious trap. It was a desperate, foolish gamble by a lonely man who was terrified of being rejected for who he was. She saw him now, not as a villain, but as a flawed, complicated man who had made a terrible mistake out of fear. And she saw herself, her own quickness to believe the worst, her own readiness to retreat into the familiar armor of cynicism. He had been dishonest, but she, in her pain, had refused to listen. Her eyes met his across the dimly lit room. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, aching sadness, and something else, something fragile and tentative. "You're an idiot," she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her temple. A small, broken sound escaped his lips, something between a laugh and a sob. "I know," he breathed, his shoulders slumping in relief. "God, Shannon, I know." "Come here," she said, her voice still weak, but her tone was clear. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, sinking to his knees beside the bed. He took her hand, his larger, warmer one engulfing hers, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. He didn't speak, just waited, his blue eyes searching hers, full of a desperate, hopeful longing. "You can't fix me, Evan, and you can't fix my past. The Clifton Initiative, it's a beautiful, insane, overwhelming idea, but I can't be your project. I won't be." "You're not a project," he said, his voice softening as he finally closed the last inch between them, his hands gently cupping her face. His thumbs brushed away the tears that had escaped. "You're my inspiration. You're the reason. Don't you see? I've spent my life building systems, finding efficiencies, and then I meet you, a woman who is the most efficient, powerful system I've ever seen, and the world tells you you're wrong. I can't unsee that. I can't walk away from it." His confession hung in the air, raw and breathtakingly honest. This wasn't just about desire. This was about something far deeper. He hadn't just seen her body. He had seen her soul. He had seen her struggle, her strength, her artistry, and he had been so moved that he had dedicated his considerable resources to honoring it. The fear that had held her back, the walls she had so carefully built, crumbled into dust. This was not a man who wanted to possess her. This was a man who wanted to elevate her. And in that moment, she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that she was falling in love with him. "Why do all this? Go through all this?" she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "You know why I did it," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Say it." "Because you loved me?" Her words were a question, a vulnerable plea hanging in the air. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft, reverent kiss to her bruised knuckles. "I did," he whispered against her skin. "I do, more than I've ever loved anything." The air between them crackled, the tension no longer of anger and betrayal, but of forgiveness and the terrifying, exhilarating promise of a second chance. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was nothing like the ones before. It wasn't hungry or desperate or tender. It was a kiss of absolution, a homecoming. It was the seal on a pact that had been broken and painstakingly, beautifully put back together. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I love you too," she sighed.
His expression grew serious. "Then you need to understand something," he said, his voice low and intense. "This isn't a fling, Shannon. This isn't a vacation romance. When I'm in New York, I'm counting the seconds until I can get on a plane back here. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally home." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it.
The moment she hadn't dared to hope for. "I love your strength and your grace. I love your laugh and the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I love that you can challenge me on a black diamond run and then discuss quantum physics over dinner. I love every single thing about you, Shannon Clifton, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She had spent so long fighting, so long proving herself, that she had never truly allowed herself to imagine a love this complete, this unconditional. "I love you, Evan Whitmore," she whispered again, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I loved you from the moment you told me my body was a different tool, not a broken one." He smiled, a slow, radiant smile that reached his eyes. "Good," he murmured, his lips brushing against hers, "because I have no intention of ever letting you go." The kiss that followed was a culmination of every stolen glance, every breathless touch, every moment of tension and desire they had shared. It was slow and deep, a conversation of the heart that needed no words. It was a kiss that sealed their past, celebrated their present, and promised a future more magnificent than any mountain peak. "Stay," she whispered, the word a soft, fragile command. "Just stay with me." "Always," he promised, his voice a hoarse whisper in the quiet room. He didn't leave her side. He climbed carefully into the bed and lay spooned behind her, talking in low tones until the pain medication and the sheer exhaustion of the day pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. And as she drifted off, her hand still clasped in his, Shannon Clifton knew that while the fall had been painful, the landing had brought her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a man who saw her not as an anomaly to be fixed, but as a masterpiece to be cherished. Months later, Shannon stood at the base of the mountain, hand in hand with Evan. It was the grand opening of the Clifton Initiative's first annual ski camp. Dozens of athletes, young and old, plus-sized, mobility-abled, and mobility-impaired, and of every race and background, were gathered around, their faces alight with the same joy and determination she knew so well. Evan had bought the Hearthstone Tavern, just as he'd said he would. The German sponsors company had also mysteriously and very publicly lost several major European contracts within weeks of their conversation, a quiet, efficient takedown orchestrated by Evan's data mining empire. He'd called it a market correction. Shannon had balked at that, but quietly called it poetic justice. That, however, was just the overture. This was the symphony. The Clifton Initiative was no longer a proposal on a phone screen. It was a living, breathing reality. The resort had donated the use of a dedicated slope and a new lodge, its stone entrance emblazoned with a sleek, modern logo of a stylized sea that looked like a carving in the snow. The press was there, but they were kept at a respectful distance. This day wasn't for them. It was for the people on the snow, the ones who had always been told they didn't belong. Shannon squeezed Evan's hand, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She wore a new ski suit, custom designed by a sponsor who had eagerly signed on. It was a deep, regal purple that made her skin glow, a testament to the new narrative they were building. "Ready?" he asked, his blue eyes shining with a pride that was more precious to her than any championship trophy. "I was born ready," she said, her voice ringing with confidence. She stepped forward, addressing the crowd. Her voice, amplified by a small speaker, was clear and strong. "Welcome. I look out at all of you and I don't see a bunch of people who don't fit. I see power. I see strength. I see a revolution. This sport isn't about exclusivity. It's not about being a certain size or shape. It's about the fire in your gut and the courage in your heart. It's about feeling the wind on your face and knowing in that moment that you are completely, utterly free. Now, let's go show them how it's done. A roar of applause and cheers erupted. The group moved toward the lift, a vibrant, colorful tapestry against the stark white of the mountain. Shannon and Evan hung back, watching them go. "Look at them," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You did this." "We did this," he corrected, turning to face her. He framed her face with his gloved hands, his gaze soft and intimate, despite the public setting. "You were the dream, Shannon. I was just the guy with the resources to help you build it." He kissed her then, a soft, sweet kiss that was a promise of the future. It was captured by a dozen cameras, but Shannon didn't care. She nor Evan ever spoke publicly about their personal relationship. They simply appeared confidently wherever they went.
Outside opinions be damned. Let them see. Let them speculate. Let them write about it. Let the world know that the black, plus-sized ski instructor was the new face of the sport, and the brilliant billionaire CEO was her biggest champion. Later that evening, after the last camper had been fed, the last speech given, they found themselves alone in the new, empty lodge. The fire was burning low in the massive stone hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the polished wood floors. "I'm proud of you," Evan said, coming up behind her as she stared out the huge picture window at the moonlit mountain. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You were magnificent out there." "We were magnificent," she corrected, echoing his words from earlier. She turned in his arms, linking her hands behind his neck. "I never thought I'd have this." "I'm just glad you said yes, not just to the initiative, but to this, to us," he responded as he rubbed the pad of his thumb over the cool titanium around his third digit. As Shannon looked down at her own jeweled finger, Evan swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her toward the large fur rug spread out in front of the crackling fire. The moonlight streamed through the window, bathing them in an ethereal glow. He deposited her gently on the soft surface, then came to kneel beside her. "Make love to me, Evan Whitmore," she whispered, her voice a husky plea. "With everything I have, Shannon Whitmore," came his growled promise. "I told you, I'm keeping my name," she moaned the correction as he squeezed her breasts possessively. "Just for tonight, then," he said as he bit her earlobe. "Fine," she hissed with delight. Moving behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, his body a warm, solid presence at her back, he slowly, carefully unzipped her thermal unit, his knuckles brushing against her spine. The fabric fell away, pooling at her feet, leaving her in just her lacy black underthings. The cool air raised goosebumps on her skin, but it was nothing compared to the fire his touch was igniting. He turned her to face him, his eyes dark with an emotion so profound it took her breath away. He didn't look at her body with the clinical curiosity of an observer or the crude appraisal of a stranger. He looked at her with the awe of a man who had just discovered a new world. "You are so beautiful," he breathed, his voice thick with wonder. "Every inch of you." He lowered his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both a promise and a consummation. His hands roamed her body, not with haste, but with a worshipful curiosity, learning the landscape of her curves, the dip of her waist, the swell of her hips. He mapped her body with his hands and his lips until she was trembling with a need so intense it was almost painful. She fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, her fingers clumsy with desire. She pushed the fabric away, her hands exploring the hard, sculpted planes of his chest, the smattering of dark hair, the solid warmth of his skin. He was a study in contrasts to her, hard where she was soft, angular where she was round. Together, they were perfect. He laid her down on the rug, his body covering hers, his wake a delicious anchor in the storm of her senses. The world outside, the mountain, the past, the future, it all melted away. There was only the fire, the shadows, and the man who looked at her as if she were the center of his universe. "Shannon," he murmured against her skin, his lips tracing a path down her neck, across her collarbone. "My Shannon." And as he showed her with his hands and his mouth and his heart just how much he desired her, how much he cherished her, Shannon Clifton finally understood. She wasn't too much. She was exactly enough. And she had finally found the one person who had always known it. She was no longer shy in her own skin. She was bold, confident, her hands exploring his body with a possessive hunger that made him groan. They moved together in a rhythm as old and as natural as the turning of the earth, a dance of passion and profound connection. The world outside faded away, leaving only the heat of the fire, the silver of the moonlight, and the overwhelming, all-consuming love that bound them together, heart and soul. In the quiet aftermath, tangled together under the soft glow of the dying embers, with the mountains standing sentinel outside, Shannon knew she had found her true home. It wasn't just in the snowy peaks of Montana or in the arms of the man she loved. It was in the fearless, joyful expanse of her own heart. She was no longer an outlier or an other. She was Shannon Clifton, and she was, finally, completely and beautifully enough.